Hello watch enthusiasts! Now in this video I have a variety of different things to speak about, including a reshuffle to my collection, which is the first thing I'll talk about, which includes some changes in terms of what I own in the collection, but also in terms of one new addition, and a few questions about my Omega, which I know a lot of people had emailed me about, and which I hadn't yet answered. But also I've been lent an extremely beautiful Nomos by Ace Jewelers, which is a very different piece, and one which I talked about late last year actually, and which I thought was a really beautiful play on Nomos' traditional design. But before I talk about this very, very kind offer of being able to review this piece and wear it for a couple of weeks, I'd like to talk about my collection. Now, my collection is something of an ongoing project, if you will. I think, as is the case with any collector's pieces. And I've been asked quite a few questions about my Omega Seamaster 300, because, as you know, this watch has been replaced at Baselworld this year with a new version with the 8800 master coaxial chronometer movement, as opposed to this 2500 caliber from Omega, which is ETA based with a coaxial escapement. And some people have asked me whether I'm going to upgrade this watch, or indeed stick with it, and I've decided actually to keep this in the collection, because the new one is personally not to my taste, and likewise I think the price increase is far too much. But while some people have asked me whether I think it would be wise to get rid of this watch, for me personally I'd like to keep hold of it, because I think it's a really beautiful look at the past, and is, as far as I'm aware, going to be the last of the Seamaster looking as it has for the last 25 years. And for me that means quite a lot in terms of the design, because this was the first Omega Bond watch, albeit in this case without the wave dial and with the ceramic bezel, and of course slightly different movement. But for me it still has a certain significance, and I love the 41mm case and the very slender design, which just works for me extremely well, and creates a watch which is a wonderful compromise between a clearly professional dive watch with its very, very accurate 120 click bezel, with the helium escape valve, and of course the 300 meter water resistance with the additional function of that coaxial escapement. And the one thing which I would love to see on this watch, and which is of course one of the drawbacks of the 2500 caliber, but isn't in fact in the 8800 caliber either, rather you have to move up to the 8900 caliber, is the use of the independent hour hand. And of course this is seen on some Planet Oceans from Omega, where you can cycle the hour hand around the dial in 1 hour increments in order to move between time zones, but also in order to move the date. And this is a fantastic addition to the Omega range, but it's something I think I can live without in the case of this particular timepiece, and certainly isn't something which compromises my enjoyment of this particular watch itself. Now, I have added one thing to the collection, but before I talk about that, I've decided, in fact, to sell my Tudor Heritage Ranger. Now, I've owned the Heritage Ranger for a while now, actually, albeit the warranty card is still showing there's a significant amount of warranty, and I won't talk about this fully in terms of details on camera, just because it's something which I'd rather discuss in email, but there's a significant amount of warranty still left on this watch. But I've decided to part with this watch because sadly it doesn't get worn as much as I would want, and in a sense my Omega Seamaster is the culprit of this, because this is a timepiece which is just so versatile, and a piece which I've been after, I think, for such a significant amount of time. Sadly, the Heritage Ranger doesn't get the time it deserves, and I suppose this is seen in the strap, for example, where I really only wore the original strap out of the AD and swapped it out almost immediately. And so as a result, as you can see, it still has all of its wrapping on it, and yes, so as you can see, it's still very much in its original condition. Even the case still has its sticker on the back. And I've worn this watch quite a lot, but it's held up extremely well. I mean, as you can see, it hasn't actually picked up any scratches, with the possible exception of a couple of nicks, as you can see, on the top of this lug here, where a spring bar caught it, which was a bit of a shame, but it's still a very minor mark, as well as there being a few hairline scratches on the flank of the watch, but nothing structural at all, with a few marks, also in terms of very fine hairline scratches along these polished elements. But apart from that, the crystal is completely unscratched, and it's still keeping extremely good time with the strap basically unused, and then likewise the other version on the canvas strap, or rather the woven strap, still having the spare spring bars and being in very, very close to new condition. And so I'll be selling this watch with the opening price of about £1,600, albeit I'll be very happy to negotiate that, and also likewise depending on where it's to be posted to. If someone is interested, that will also depend. But if you are interested in the purchase of this ETA-powered 150-metre water-resistant baby Rolex Explorer with its 41mm diameter, very sharp edges, and it's completely unpolished, this watch, unrepolished, so the edges are all still as sharp as they were when it came out of the factory, then please do drop me an email in order to ask any further questions. And some people already know about my sale of this watch, but I just wanted to talk about it on the channel, just to both inform you of it, but also to mark this in my collection's changes. But in terms of this watch, as I just put it back on the watch pillow, this watch does of course come with the full documents, and although I won't give the full length of warranty left, there's as near as 2 years as makes very little difference still on the warranty, with all the documents and so on. But I suppose I will be sad to see this watch go, because it's a piece which I love in terms of its design. But it had to go because I've added a new piece to the collection which I was fairly pressed to buy, and I may well buy another one of these Heritage Rangers in future because I have enjoyed it so much. But the piece that I've been very, very excited to see, you will have seen in the thumbnail of this this video, because it's a piece which I've been wearing now for about a week now, and which was encouraged, I think, by Baselworld this year. Now, Baselworld this year showed a variety of very interesting pieces, and certainly the Seiko stand was a part of the show which impressed a lot of people, with new re-editions of their 1968 divers, which were, of course, their first 300-metre watches, although I believe in 1967 they came out with a very similar version as well. But these are beautifully made high-beat 300-metre dive watches. And bearing in mind that the Seiko SBDX017 has recently been discontinued, according to some sources, with Seiya Japan claiming that theirs have been discontinued, I decided to get hold of one. And this is the piece itself. Now, I was extremely pleased to get hold of this watch, because, of course, it's rumoured discontinued. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this watch come back into the collection in some other form in future, but I don't know what that will be, and I rather like the domed Hardlex crystal. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if Seiko make the new watch far more similar to the green version we saw at Baselworld, which cost, I think, just over €3,000. So a significant price increase over this watch, and that version featured a ceramic bezel insert with a luminescent section from 12 to 20. But likewise, the crystal was also sapphire. But I must say I rather like the domed Hardlex. I think it gives a wonderful vibe to this watch in terms of appearing old-fashioned, while still retaining a certain scratch resistance. And one thing to note, of course, is the fact that Hardlex does come in various different grades, according to a variety of sources, and this certainly has been holding up extraordinarily well, and is, as you can see, actually below the bezel itself. It doesn't actually reach the level of the bezel, so it's certainly protected from any scratches or bumps. And this watch I bought on eBay, in fact, from the seller who goes by the name of Epic Watches, and who's been extremely good with me in terms of providing me with really all the support and help I would need after buying this watch. And just to give him a hand, because he's been so kind with me, I must say, and it's always wonderful to find a good seller. He also has an Instagram account by the name of Epic Watch Photos, which is worth taking a look at for some interesting horological photography. But in terms of the lines of this watch, it's something utterly unique on the market, and couldn't be really made by anyone other than Seiko, with the sides of the watch wonderfully finished with that Zaratsu style of polishing. And I will produce a full review of this watch once I've worn it for maybe a month and a half, to have a really good feel for it. But in terms of my first impressions, I've been very impressed with the Seiko 8L35 inside it, which is, in some people's eyes, a Grand Seiko movement, though I must admit, having spoken to Seiko at Baselworld, it seems this movement isn't exactly an unregulated, an undecorated Grand Seiko movement, but rather it's based on the 20-year-old architecture of a Grand Seiko movement, so I wouldn't go so far as to say it is a Grand Seiko movement, but certainly it performs like one. And it also isn't as a high beat movement. It runs at 4 Hz rather than 5 Hz, like the high beat 8L55, which is used in the reproduction, which sells for I think €5,500, which was released at Baselworld. And of course the watch is a monoblock build, as you can see, with the case back being a single piece to the rest of the case, so you drop things in through the top of the watch. And this does pose a few problems for servicing, though I must admit I haven't noticed any problems, because as you can see there is a notch in the top of the bezel, which I will do some more research into this, but I assume is in order to remove the bezel more quickly and easily without any damage to the case. And then it's as simple as simply unscrewing the crystal assembly and dropping the movement out of the front of the watch. But certainly it works extremely well, and the finishing on the hands, as you can see, is absolutely wonderful, with that bezel also being a highly lustrous aspect of this watch, which I must admit I had a few concerns about when I first bought it. But having worn it now for a week, I must say I haven't found it to be any less durable than an aluminium insert. And there have been a lot of reports of this bezel scratching extremely easily. And I haven't bumped this watch, and I tend to be quite careful with my watches in terms of babying them, which is neither good nor bad. It's neither here nor there. It depends how you wear your watches. But it does stand, as you can see, proud of its mountings by just a little bit. And it is a steel bezel, as far as I'm aware, a steel bezel insert, which is then lacquered and then varnished over its surface to give this phenomenal lustre and wonderful reflectivity. And of course it's graduated all the way around, and I believe you can polish this in a very similar way to car paint. And so far I can see that it behaves very much like car paint as well, in the sense that rather than developing the matted surface that an anodized or painted aluminium bezel insert does, it develops hairline scratches. So like you would see on a non-Diashield, because this case has Diashield, but on a non-Diashield case you will see these swirls and marks, which are not produced by any bump or anything, but merely by abrasion of very small particles on the surface of the steel. And I get the impression this bezel accumulates these as well, with a few small dots as well, where I believe the manufacturing left a few imperfections. But the quality of this bezel is absolutely phenomenal, and for the price that this watch costs, is beyond anything I could have believed with this watch. But certainly it gives a phenomenal look, and the luminescence of this watch again is brilliant. But before I go on about this watch too much, the review will come in the next few weeks in full, and is a wonderful addition to the collection, even if it is a rather large piece. I must say I don't think, for example, next to this 41mm Omega, it appears particularly unwieldy. But anyway, I shall just put these to the side, and then bring out the main article of this review and video, which is of course this beautiful Nomos Orion. Now the background behind this model is that this piece is based on the Nomos Orion, and is presented in a very similar way to other Nomos timepieces. And it comes in this very nicely designed but very simple style of wooden case with Nomos and Glasuta in silver painted onto the surface. And this is hinged and locked, and as you can see, you simply press this button to open it up. Then one has the polishing cloth, and then the watch itself, which would normally be pinned down by these two elastic pieces, but which I've removed just to give you a better look. And the watch itself is, as you can see, a very elegant timepiece based on a classic design from Nomos. And of course the stainless steel case is 38mm in diameter by 50mm from lug to lug, and then 8.8mm thick. And this means you have a watch with proportions which are very different to what you would expect from this timepiece, because it doesn't wear like a traditional dress watch with the short lugs and the very large dial in relation to its case, but rather presents you with a timepiece which wears in a far more imposing way, but whilst remaining extremely comfortable and supremely legible. And as you can see, the case is only 8.8mm thick, making it a wonderfully slim piece, with lugs which jut out at a very curved angle from this case, to give you a great deal of movement in the strap, as well as providing you with a great deal of space. So as you can see, it fits very, very well across the wrist, with the strap itself wrapping very comfortably, albeit on my wrist this strap is slightly too long. And this is why actually this watch would fit larger wrists better, thanks to its 38mm diameter, whilst I think the 35mm Orion would fit smaller wrists. Then of course one has a very well designed, but unguarded as you can see, polished crown, with Nomos again engraved into the top of it in full. And this watch being manually wound, this gives you a great deal of grip, thanks to its very large knurlings. Then of course sitting atop the watch is a sapphire crystal, and it's a very heavily domed sapphire crystal which matches the domed crystal on the back as well, which gives a smooth curve to this watch. And the quality is immediately apparent, as seen in the lack of any sort of lip or division between the case and the crystal, which makes for a beautiful, beautiful aesthetic. This size of the dial is also emphasised simply by its ratio of bezel to dial, which is very, very high. As you can see, there's a great and a very large dial in relation to the thickness of the bezel. And the dial is presented in a beautiful style of matted silver, which gives the appearance of a sort of a bead blasted effect, but it appears much brighter in terms of its shine than stainless steel. And the dial itself is the area where this watch is so different to other Orions on the market, because this timepiece features an asymmetrical dial. And some people have said this would be a nightmare for someone who likes their watches to be symmetrical, and I can see why. But this watch has a charm of its own, which I really have noticed over the past week or so. And as you can see, the hands, unlike other Nomos models, and you can get this setup on the standard Orion, but you don't usually see them, are blackened hands rather than blued hands. And this is the effect on these long and straight standard central hands for the minutes and the hours, and the small seconds, which, as you can see, are recessed into the dial and also provide these wonderful concentric rings to further pattern this area and accentuate it. The text on the dial is kept to a bare minimum with simply Nomos Glashütte and then made in Germany at the bottom. And then one sees these indices. And the indices are the key characteristic of this timepiece, because this is the De Stijl limited edition of 100. And De Stijl was a movement that started in 1917, so last year when this was released, it was the centenary. And this was a movement which is also known as neoplasticism, and is a movement which is known for example, Mondrian's work, in terms of incorporating the forms of nature into a far more tightly organised and geometrical form, and you'll notice this in any of his work. Then, of course, one has Max Bill, who was also a designer of watches later on, who was also a member of this style. And this is seen in the way the dial is presented, where the indices are all unique. Each index is different to the others, depending on where they are. So, for example, one sees a very small dot at 6 o'clock, a fairly fat square at 7, but then one sees very elongated 8 o'clock. And what this gives you is a great deal of versatility between different forms and variations in this, whilst the minute track around the very edge remains constant. And the elegance of this is immediately apparent, and is something very, very charming that isn't immediately striking, but which grows on one after wearing this for several days. And certainly there is a real beauty to this, especially the fact that the hands, as they move behind each index, and notably the hour hand, occasionally disappears as it lines up with an index which is almost the same width as it is, and so as a result appears to simply be a longer hand, which is a phenomenal look and something truly unique to this timepiece, and gives you something which is subtle, and isn't a very bold, brash limited edition, but rather is something which only someone else who knows what it is will recognise. Now, flipping the watch over, we see the wonderful Alpha caliber from Nomos, but before I talk about that, you'll see we have Nomos Orion Limited Edition De Stijl for Ace Jewellers, who are extremely kind to lend this in. I've really enjoyed wearing it for the last few days, and I must say it was a brilliant move to have this made. Then, of course, this, as you can see, is number 2 out of the 100 made. Now, the case back is actually not screwed in. It's as with older watches, a simple push fit style of fitting, and I can understand why, bearing in mind how thin this watch has to be. And through that exhibition caseback, which is optional on Orions, I don't believe it's optional on this watch, which is £1,727, although I believe that price is no longer the case, as I believe these are sold out. But this option of the exhibition caseback, which is an option for the standard versions, or alternatively there is a solid caseback, is something I really would recommend investing the extra money in, because the movement is half the fun with this watch. And as you can see, it's a manually wound Alpha caliber with these beautiful stripes on it, as well as the golden balance wheel and those thermally blued screws, which again pattern the movement. And this is, of course, an in-house movement, which is rare for this price, with beautiful decoration, circular and concentric decoration on those wheels. And as you can see, it is a manually wound movement, which winds extremely smoothly and provides you with 43 hours of power reserve. And the movement runs extremely well, as you can see, and I love the fact that you can see the escapement, the pallet fork, just moving there, with a great deal of decoration on this movement, which really I wouldn't expect for this price range. And some may complain that manually wound movements aren't as quote-unquote good as automatic ones, but personally I actually like a manually wound movement on the dress watch, because it allows you to have a slimmer watch, but also, if you have an exhibition case bag, it allows you to really savour the mechanisation of the watch, and be able to enjoy looking at these parts which would normally be concealed behind a large rotor. And of course, this doesn't involve micro-rotor movements, but micro-rotor movements are so rare at anything but the extremely high price ranges, one may as well forget about them. And so this forms a really wonderful option as far as a beautifully designed and utterly unique dress watch, with a form which may not fit someone who likes a watch with a short lug-to-lug length, because certainly this is a very long lug-to-lug length in relation to its case size, but is a beautiful piece in terms of being something very different in a collection. Now, mounted via the spring bars on these drilled lugs is a beautiful shell Cordovan strap, as you can see, branded Nomos, and which provides an excellent level of quality and detail, with the suppleness and softness of this particular type of leather being very, very well known and documented. Then, of course, one has the Nomos buckle, which, as you can see, is also a custom job. It's not one of the off-the-shelf buckles that have been branded, but rather is something unique to the brand, and is very deeply engraved, and again is something simple, which I think is in keeping with the brand's ethos, rather than having a very complex style of deployment, but rather something very comfortable in this case, is potentially better. Now, on the wrist, as you can see, my wrist is about 6 and 6.7 inches in diameter, rather in circumference, and as you can see, it's the watch does feel a tad large, and ideally, if I owned this watch, I'd punch an extra hole in the strap. But certainly it fits well in terms of the case size, though I must say I would go for the 35mm version rather than this full 38. But nonetheless, it's a really wonderful looking timepiece, with all the design which Nomos are so extremely well known for these days, and which is able to create something which will be different to anything else in a collection, and which, thanks to the use of a movement which fits the watch very, very well, can be very slender and follow the forms that Nomos would want. Anyway, as I finish this video, I would of course like to thank Ace Jewellers for being so kind as to lend me this watch, which really is a beautiful timepiece and something which was great to show on the channel. And of course, as I end, I would also like to of course remind you, if you are interested in my Tudor in any way, then do by all means send me an email. My price is by no means final. I'm very willing to negotiate, depending upon the shipping and simply in terms of what's competitive on the market. And of course, do go and have a look at my Instagram as well at I'm on the Watch Guy, where I have various pieces of horological photography and other bits and bobs which may be of interest. And if you did enjoy the video, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to be able to enjoy more content here in future. So thank you very much for watching. This is I'm on the Watch Guy, out.